Welcome to the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, a program dedicated to uncovering the unified nature of reality and humanity's ever-evolving place as truly galactic beings. For more information on the Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit us online at www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Hello, and thank you so much for joining us on the Science of Magic, coming to you through the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. We can also be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour we'll be exploring the truth of fiction. My first shamanic teacher was a Lakota elder. Well, I remember the frustration I experienced with his tendency to answer questions with questions if he elected to answer at all. He used an economy of words and was old and wise, approaching his 90s. I, being only 22, was young, overly verbose, and impatient. One day, as fate would have it, I blew up at him. "Why don't you just answer my question?" I all but shouted. "Because you would not hear me from there. I'm not hard of hearing, and I'm sitting right next to you. It's not the distance, but your reality that separates words from understanding." After working with him for 6 years, I began to notice he taught through example, and the few times he spoke, he instructed through stories. When I asked why, he responded, "You must first entertain the possibility before you can perceive the reality." Eventually, I came to realize that his stories were ever-deepening access points to multiple realities. I would listen to a story and in my arrogance thought I knew exactly what it meant. But then, sometime later, he would repeat it verbatim, as is the way with oral traditions, and I would perceive an entirely different meaning. "Did that really happen?" I asked him after listening to one of his traditional stories. "It has happened, is happening, and will never happen at all." Ugh. Years later, I think I'm finally just starting to comprehend. Through studying perceptions and realities while obtaining my degree in psychology, and later in my private practices, I found the wisdom of my old teacher's approach. It is particularly deepened through my work with others in my shamanic practice. One study I read about still sticks with me. A group of anthropologists were observing tribal community that had been living in the deep jungle for generations. The scientists took one young man from a tribe who had never been out into the jungle into an open plain on top of a bluff. There was a herd of water buffalo in the distance. When one scientist pointed the herd out to the native, he responded with a huff, "Those are not water buffalo, those are ants." The anthropologist took the young native down closer to the buffalo. "See, they're buffalo." "No, they were ants, but magically transformed into buffalo when we approached," the native corrected. Another accounting was of the natives in North America who didn't run to safety when the conquering ships came to shore, as they could not see the massive clippers right in front of them. Until the invaders showed up in recognizable form, men on foot, they were outside of the natives' reality and therefore invisible. An interesting phenomenon is how fiction paves the road for expanded reality. Before Star Trek, it was so rare to hear about extraterrestrials as to be non-existent. Now, "beam me up, Scotty" is common vernacular. We think nothing about beaming information from one cell phone to another. If the Starship Enterprise were to send down a shuttle to the surface, most people in our culture would not only see it, but recognize it for what it was. We accept as given facts things not even in the reality of cultures past. The Earth is round, we can fly through the air in aircraft, we can instantaneously talk to and see someone on the other side of the world, and we've walked on the moon. If you were to try to explain any of these concepts to people of the 15th century, the result would have been at least imprisonment, if not burning at the stake. For people to be able to see or recognize the reality of a thing, it must first be present in their subconscious. The initial step in this process is to implant the possibility into the imagination. This is what my Lakota teacher understood and incorporated into his teachings. This is also the premise behind the shamanic journey metaphor. The shamanic journey trance is like an interactive dream. It presents a metaphorical story to the imagination. These stories are actually ever-deepening representations of expanded realities present at the quantum level. Through interpreting these stories, our perceptions and therefore our opportunities are systematically expanded. The model of paving the way for deeper understanding through engaging in the imagination operates on the individual level as well as the cultural. For individuals or societies to recognize truth, it must first be implanted into the subconscious. The channel for this is the imagination. Stories, myths, and archetypes and fiction engage the imagination. My guest this hour is a master at offering pathways into the imagination that expand perception. From powerful channeled works into multidimensional primers, Barbara Hand-Plow has provided rich fodder for the evolution of consciousness. I will introduce Barbara and her surprising new book, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, after this short break. You are listening to The Science of Magic. This and other innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net.
Searching for the light. One people, one nation. Coming from the stars. One people, one
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is The Science of Magic, dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is Barbara Hand-Plow, author of Revelations of the Ruby Crystal. For those of you that don't know, Barbara is an international acclaimed teacher, author, and Mayan calendar researcher who has taught at sacred sites throughout the world. Her numerous books include The Palladian Agenda, Alchemy of the Nine Dimensions, Awakening the Planetary Mind, The Mayan Chronicles, and The Mayan Code, just to name a few. Barbara holds an MA in Theology from Loyola University, Chicago, and for years has an acclaimed publisher of books on spirituality and new consciousness at Bear & Company, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Barbara, first I'd like to offer my heartfelt appreciation for all of your timeless and profound literary contributions to the enlightenment and spiritual evolution of humankind.
Thank you, Gwilda, and it's good to be here.
It's so wonderful to have you, I can't tell you. So you've written in many forms over the years, from channeled works or powerful primers to archaeological accounts. I believe fiction is kind of a new genre for you. Why have you headed in this new direction?
Well, when I hit age 70 a few years ago, I looked over 45 years of publishing books and tried to look at what was my most original contribution, which I've decided is the Pleiadian Agenda and Alchemy of Nine Dimensions. In other words, my work on 9 dimensions of consciousness is what's really original in my work. And so then I started looking for a new way to express that. I'd written about it, and I'd gone out and I'd been teaching workshops based on that material for 15, 20 years. And I wanted to find and completely new way to express this level of consciousness. And so I went to fiction because I discovered that by having a group of really fascinating characters, all of whom have a different point of view and a different mentality, I discovered that just getting them to interact in fiction actually created a multi-dimensional novel. And so Revelations of the Ruby Crystal really is a 9-dimensional novel.
I love those works. They've been primers for me in my school for years, I have to tell you. And some of those works have been channeled. Would you consider the Revelations of the Ruby Crystal to be a channeled work?
Actually, my only channeled book is the Pleiadian Agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And Revelations of the Ruby Crystal came in very much the way fiction comes in for writers, which I think we do go into an altered state and we do work with our muse, but it's not like channeling, and it's kind of hard to explain the difference because really writers and artists and painters are in somewhat of an altered state when they're working in most cases. But channeling is actually the reception of a clear message from another dimension. And when that came to me through the Pleiadian Agenda back in 1995, I absolutely could not resist bringing it in. It was so powerful that I literally had no choice, and so I just channeled it in.
And that's what I've heard other people say, is it just wakes you up at night and won't give you rest until you bring it through.
Yeah, that's right.
In this book, you've not only delved deeply into the motivations and patterns of your main characters, but you also bring in elements of their parents. Why this multi-generational approach?
Oh, this was such an opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, to have people basically in their 30s at the current time in the novel, and then their parents who were basically in their 60s and 70s. And what I wanted that addition of the wisdom approach. From the older characters observing what the younger characters are doing. Now, this book is the first book in a trilogy, and I'm writing the sequel at this moment. And what happens in the sequel, and I think the final book, is the parents become even stronger characters as they begin to reflect on what's going on with their children, but also what's going on in current society, because I wrote a major book on the Mayan calendar called the Mayan Code back in 2008. And I think something really, and not only think, I know that something really profound happened in 2011, 2012. We're living in the middle of a reality which has shifted very, very fundamentally. And so I wanted to devote this trilogy to tracking this shift in human consciousness, which I think is one of the greatest ones that has ever occurred. Somehow I wanted to make sure that at least somebody, got it down on paper because it's such a big deal.
It is, and yet it seems to be kind of outside of our consciousness. Everybody expected everything to blow up at 12/21/12, and when it didn't, they thought it was life as usual. So what you're doing with this book is representing, no, it's not life as usual, and this is the changes we're looking at?
Yeah, and I never thought anything was going to blow up. I thought there was just going to be a shift into some other level of consciousness. And I think where we are right now at the current moment is I think we've entered into experiencing reality very much on the level of the quantum, very much on the level of the quantum physics as understood in contemporary science. And in my system, 9 dimensions of consciousness, the quantum is the 4th dimension. Like you and I are existing in linear space and time in a solid form in the 3rd dimension. And then what happens at the 4th dimensional level is that all of the contents of the collective mind and the realm of archetypes is functioning. And what goes on with the 4th dimension is all of us are plugged into it, and it actually is what connects us with each other. When we're in a 3rd dimensional mode, we're living very much in our own personal lifetime. So when we're in the 4th dimension, we're operating in a collective mode, and I think that's what happened at the end of the Mayan calendar, and so I'm attempting to bring that through in fiction. I've attempted to.
I couldn't help but notice how your characters seem to access this esoteric information from the ancient sites in the book. Did you get some of your information by tapping into those locations, the ones in your storyline?
Oh, definitely. In fact, I think we're in the middle of it. We've been in the middle, I'd say since maybe the 1960s and 70s, we've been in the middle of a collective experiment with sacred sites on the planet. And this, of course, can be proven just because of how many people have gone to sacred sites and have interacted with them and have taught at those sites. And what goes on at those sites are memory activators. Those sites are a source for the Akashic records. Those sites are a source for the intelligence of the Earth, because Earth is an intelligent, live being. And so, sacred sites are a very big deal. And then in the case of this novel, the novel takes place in Rome and in Tuscany, Italy. And the reason for that is there's a major line going through Italy and through Germany and through Tunisia called the midline. And I'm working with the issue of the midline in this novel in terms of human consciousness and history.
That's pretty fascinating. Now, I've heard, Barbara, that these lines and these sacred sites are shifting slightly as we change our relative position in the galaxy and the galaxy's relative position in the universe. Are you experiencing this as well?
Oh yeah, it's not only the lines that are shifting, but also the vertical access ability that runs through these lines. In other words, another issue that goes on in my own work is that the Pleiadians told me years ago that what would happen at the end of the Mayan calendar would be the awakening of 9 dimensions of consciousness in all humans. And when you get into having 9-dimensional consciousness, this includes contact with the divine. This includes being able to hear the sounds of the cosmos. These are very, very high levels of consciousness, as well as the telluric, which is the inner earth. And so what's happening to us right now is all of us have become much more sensitive from a vertical point of view through these sacred sites. We're picking up much more information on many, many different levels, and most people just can't handle it practically, as you know from your own work. It's really an awesome awakening of consciousness.
It really is, and it's equally challenging. So basically, we're receiving information through our chakra system from much more expansive levels up and down, and people are having to process out all the sleeping places. Is that how you're seeing it?
Yeah, and also we're also sweeping through and processing things that have happened in our deep past. That always happens. Another thing that's going on right now is the change of the ages, and we're moving out of the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius. And the age of Pisces for 2,000 years is all about the power of organized religion. And as we move into Aquarius, we're moving into the ability to access divine consciousness directly without the intervention of any religious form. And so we're just look what's happening on the planet right now, just in terms of migrations and in terms of shifts between the East and the West. And by the way, speaking of that midline that goes through the planet that's so highly conscious, going through Rome and then through Germany, the refugees are moving out of the Middle East and they're moving right up that line. It's just the most amazing thing to watch this happen.
So it's kind of like a migration, or like walking the Camino. It's a pilgrimage of sorts.
Yeah, that's true. And then the novel, the trilogy is, the timeline for the trilogy is 2011 through 2020. And so the novel that you have in your hands, Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, is 2011 through about 2013. And so what I'm doing is I'm tracking this shift, this global shift, because it's such a remarkable experience. It's so incredible to be alive in the middle of this.
It is. It really is. And just to watch it take form. And, we've had all these prophecies, but when you watch it start to happen, you go, oh, that's what they meant. It's not what we had envisioned at all, but this is what's going on. I find it really enlightening, to say the least. I love the way you weave in the psychic explorations and multidimensional contact into the storyline with your characters. Can you share with us what your purpose was in doing that?
Well, the way this happened, Gwilda, was that all of the characters in this novel, except one, Lorenzo Giannini, a Jungian analyst, all of them showed up one day in my office in May of 2011. And I took out a yellow sheet, a yellow pad, and I received their names, their ages, their backgrounds, their professions. There was an issue of parents and children, as you've already pointed out. And so all the characters came in except one, and then Lorenzo showed up later. And so this novel was not plotted. I never plotted it for one moment. I just simply put the characters together and let them do their thing. And so what happened with the characters is Sarah Adamson, the main female character, has a psychic awakening during this novel. She falls in love, and then she becomes a psychic. And she's the one who has the ruby crystal as a ring. And so I didn't have any intention about this. I didn't plan it. It is just each one of these characters did what they do. And of course,
I love the way that came through for you, and they
Yeah.
do weave together just so organically. Barbara, we're going to have to take a quick break here, and we'll be back with this fascinating subject just on the other side. We'll return to our discussion after this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. You want to hear more? Other innovative episodes can always be found on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net.
One people, one nation, searching through the night.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on www.thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is author and publisher Barbara Hand-Plow. Barbara, in your book, there was 3 religions that seemed to come together, Judaism, Catholicism, and Egyptian practices. How do you see them as being related?
How is what related? Don't understand the
Judaism,
question.
Catholicism, and the Egyptian practices.
Boy, I don't know if I see a relationship. I mean, certainly if we go back in way back in time into ancient times, for example, I think the Hebrew people are actually very much influenced by the Egyptians, much more than a lot of Jewish people would like to think. So there's connections way back when, but I don't know if I'm exploring that in the current moment.
Okay, one thing that really kind of fascinates me is the missing years of Christ, and that he purportedly studied in the Egyptian library. I was wondering if that played any part here.
Well, it does come out in the novel that he would have studied in Egypt, and I'm sure that he did. And this would have been actually when he was more or less around 10 to 11, 12 years old, maybe younger. But the issue I think you're referring to is that there's a lot of people who believe that he did not die on the cross, and then he ended up going into the East and Middle East and the Far East, and actually was a teacher for people in the Middle and Far East for about around another 40 years until he was 70 years old. And his name in their tradition is Issa, and I actually think this is true, and I'm going to be exploring that in the sequels to Revelations, because I think one of the ways that we can heal the wounds between East and West is to start to realize that he is a spiritual teacher and guide for all of us on the planet, and not just Christians.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, because it seems like as we went into the long dark, if you will, through the Mayan calendar, that this polarization happened. And so all of us have similar roots somewhere. But then as we went through the long dark, this separation happened, which created the opportunity for negativity, war, strife. And now, as we're coming into this time in the dimensions where we have the opportunity to blend back together, it's works like these that set the stage for the understanding of, yes, we all are one, and these all have common denominators. And if we can find the place where we agree versus the places we disagree, we can shift. And if we don't, I think we're in a lot of trouble. What's your thought on that?
Well, I certainly agree with you, and I also would say that I've been a pacifist my whole life, and I've been a strong anti-war activist going way back to the Vietnam War. And I think that the only thing that's going to stop war is when people are just completely sick of it. And I think that's coming, and I also think people are becoming aware of the global elite profiteering. The only person who ever benefits from war is the arms manufacturing cadre. And so I think we are coming to that point where people are really sick of it, and I do think that we're going to actually shift out of that. I think it's actually a 4,000-year human experience, starting during the Age of Aries around 2000 BC, then going through the Age of Aries, and then it ended up being religious warfare during the Age of Pisces. And I actually think that that's going to be ending with the Age of Aquarius. And I hope I live long enough to see that, because wouldn't that be wonderful?
That would be amazing, because it's like, religious war isn't that an oxymoron?
Absolutely oxymoron. I mean, only the Age of Pisces, ruled by the planet Neptune, could ever possibly create something like that. And so I think that we're in the middle of a deep exploration of the meaning of aggression, and I also think we're in the middle of a deep exploration of sexuality. So this novel, the background subject matter in this novel is priestly sexual abuse, because I wanted to explore the way power is used to abuse people sexually. So that's one of the deepest themes in this trilogy, of course.
Yes, I know. I couldn't help but notice that your novel goes into priestly sexual abuse of children. Could you discuss the link between this abuse, the resulting pain and fragmentation, and harvesting of power?
Well, in my case, of course, I've always been a healer, a teacher, work based on Chiron. And so the novel is working very deeply with healing sexual abuse and healing that issue especially for Catholics, because it's been such an issue for the Roman Catholic Church for really the last 1600 years. But deeper than that, Gwilda, I'm going into the actual issue of, like, how does evil get into the world? And certainly the most evil thing that we see, besides warfare, is the abuse of children. It's just incredible that anyone could abuse a child. And so I use that as a doorway into going into deep questioning about the actual origins of evil, how evil breaks into the planet, and most importantly, what we can do about evil as individuals.
As a shamanic practitioner, and I've been practicing for, over 30 years, I have had the misfortune, if you will, of experiencing through other people the massive epidemic of sexual abuse of children. And I've come to believe that is through this fragmentation this causes that evil does enter into the world and into people, and then it's passed down generationally. Is that the way you're seeing it here, Barbara?
Oh, that's very interesting, Gwilda, because most people just don't understand that. And you and I look at that exactly the same way. And for some reason, maybe it was because of the early sacrificial cults thousands of years ago, for some reason Christianity adopted a ritual system and a hierarchical structural system that basically is using the abuse of children for energy to fuel the church itself. And that's a very, very, what do we call that? There's a word for that, blasphemous thing to say. But it's kind of hard to deny it when you look at what's actually happened in the church.
It's absolutely groundbreaking and earth-shattering when you open up your consciousness to what's actually been going on. I mean, consciousness can only be as expansive as the subconscious of the individual, and that's, ceilinged by society's subconscious. If we can't conceive of a thing and we can't see it, we can't change it. And when I was reading your book, Barbara, I have to say that A, you're a very brave woman, and B, this is opening up to a truth that no one could conceive of, and therefore it hasn't been changed for a long time. Was this your motivation behind writing it?
Yes, that was my deepest motivation, and that's where fiction is really working for me, because you'll notice in the novel the characters themselves are gradually waking up and realizing what's going on, and they're going through varying stages of denial. It all gets set off by a New York Times reporter, Simon Appel, who's being paid to investigate the issue. And what happens gradually, and it's going to continue through the sequel, is that people are breaking through their own denial. And I hope that the readers of the book will experience the same breakthrough through their own denial, because I don't think this can go on if people face up to the truth. I really don't. I think when people see it, it's like that little boy who washed up on the beach of Lesbos, who was one of the migrant people coming through from Syria. It took an image like that to wake people up, to realize the suffering that's going on with these people. And this is what we need to see regarding pre-C sexual abuse. We need to open our eyes.
Yes, and it's like one of the denials that really came to my mind recently is how we are feeling compassion for these people that are immigrants that are being pushed out of their own country, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we have been blinded to the suffering of the people in our culture. I walk by bums. I mean, that never used to happen 20, 30 years ago in this country. And now the homeless are of all ages, and it's rampant, and the suffering is horrific, and yet we cannot see it.
Yeah. It'd be great, too, if the migrant crisis would actually open people up to what's going right on in the streets in front of their eyes, wouldn't it? You know, the whole
wouldn't
issue
it? Yeah.
with the person being without a home. And one of the interesting things about the migrant crisis to me is it's so fascinating the way Germany opens itself up. That power of that midline just takes an issue and processes it. Because from one point of view, it didn't make sense for them to just open. They just basically opened the doorway and said, come, and people are coming.
That's pretty phenomenal. And given the history of what the, during the Holocaust and everything else, it's a beautiful thing to see the turnaround there.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, these are amazing times. And these are the days the truth can't hide, and it's works like what you're presenting that are making the difference, I believe.
Yeah, and as I go along on my timeline, the refugee crisis is part of the novel, of course, as we go along in the sequel. And one of the reporters, Simon, gets sent to the Middle East. So I'm really delving into the issues that are the crisis of our times.
And it is a crisis, absolutely a crisis right now. And how we respond in the next few years, I think, is going to make all the difference in the course of human development.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to call it good again for this one. We will be back on the flip side of this short break. You're listening to The Science of Magic. Our theme song, One People, One Nation, is from the Winds of Time album by my musical group Starfire, and can be found on iTunes.com, cdbaby.com, amazon.com, and on my website, gwildawiyaka.com. We'll see you on the flip side.
One people, one nation, searching through the night. One people, one nation, searching for the light. One people, one nation, coming from the stars. One people, one nation.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State certified occupational school training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com. Welcome back. This is the Science of Magic, a place where magic and science come together to promote enlightenment. We can be found on thescienceofmagic.net. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Our guest this hour is author and publisher Barbara Hand-Plow. Welcome back, Barbara.
Hi, good to be here.
We were just starting to get down deep and dirty, as I would say. So I'm going to open this with a nice challenging one. You suggested in your book that the Vatican is capping Earth energy that goes back thousands of years. How does the Earth create the energy to keep its power?
Well, the Earth, this is the basic structural energy of the planet, is this powerful, creative, biological force. And when it's used in a positive way, it's just an amazingly beautiful thing. And one of the things that came through in the Pleiadian agenda is that the Pleiadians say that we are slated to actually seed the cosmos itself with Earth's biological intelligence at the end of the Mayan calendar. And so I think one of the reasons we're going through such a great struggle right now is that we're going through a purification of the actual biology that we are so fortunate to be able to participate in. And so one of the themes in the book, of course, is that the Vatican is a power center that is using the actual biological force of the planet in a very negative way. And by the way, Gwilda, also in a positive way. Everything isn't negative about Catholicism and about the Church. What I'm going after is the abusive tendencies, because I hope those can purify, and I hope the Church can come through in a new form during the age of Aquarius.
That could be phenomenal, and one of the things that I'm very, very aware of is there's two sides to every coin, and where we choose to deny and where we choose to engage make all the difference in outcome. So if we can look at the negative and choose to engage in the positive, that can be very transformative. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and I think it's actually, we can actually see it in the kind of mystery play of the popes that's going on. Right now we have two popes in the Vatican, Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, who was a very, very bad guy. And the novel does a beautiful job in exposing who Ratzinger is. And then now we have Pope Francis. And during the first novel, we have the Pope Francis coming in as the next pope. And I think that Pope Francis is genuinely trying to reform the Church and genuinely trying to open the doors. And in the sequel, I'm working very deeply on how the forces in the Vatican, especially the Curia, are attempting to prevent the reformation of the Catholic Church. So it's really an incredible timeline to be involved in at the current moment.
And to be in the center of that and being able to channel the information through fiction has got to be exciting. So what part do you feel that religious rituals play in this exploitation of energy that we're talking about?
Ooh, as you know, that's the most intense part of the novel, because I'm really exploring what's going on with the sacraments, with communion, with confession, with ordination. And I'm really exploring how ritual is used as a power tool by the hierarchy. And people who read this book, especially Catholics or ex-Catholics, are going to do a lot of deep thinking, I think, about the rituals in the Catholic Church. Because as with other aspects of life, there are many positive things about these rituals. It's just that people need to start seeing the dark side as well as the light side of what goes on with rituals.
Yeah, so it would appear to me that if you're using ritual to extort energy, that would be the same as practicing sorcery, the exploration of natural forces for personal gain. And in my experience, that always tends to have a nasty backlash. Is that why you're suggesting that the Catholic Church is actually imploding?
Yeah, I think that the Catholic Church has to look at the energy that's being created through communion, for example, global communion going on 24 hours of the day. I think the Church itself needs to look at what it's creating. And I think it's happening because the Church is mirroring back the energy by some of the things that are going on right within the Church itself. For instance, the sexual abuse of children. Why does that occur? How can a person who has taken sacramental holy orders get involved in something like that? These are deep questions, and they do need to be looked at.
So where does the life of Christ and the teachings of Christ come into Catholicism?
Well, this is a really complicated issue, which I'm exploring all the way through the trilogy, which is basically the distortion of who Christ was. And so in the sequel that I'm working on now, I'm going more deeply into who he may have been. And a major character in the book, Sarah Adamson, is a scholar working on her PhD in patristics, which is the study of the early church. So the first book, The Revelations of the Ruby Crystal, goes into the formation of the early church from 0 AD to about 350, 400 AD. And by the way, Gwilda, all of the material in this book that's topical is factual and very, very accurate. The fictional part is what's going on with the characters. And so this exploration of deep theology during the early church is very accurate information, and I looked at some of the aspects of the church, the development of the church that were put down as heresies. For example, the issue of Marcion Pontus. I bring up some of the people who got dumped back there 1600 years ago because they had opposing views to the orthodoxy that was developing. And I think it's very natural at the end of the age of Pisces to look back into the formation of a major religion during the beginning of Pisces and look at the elements that went into it and to look at what was discarded. For instance, the issues of Gnosticism, which is a deep theology of knowledge. So I'm really going back in there and really digging into the closed boxes, so to speak.
You know, Barbara, that's one of the many things that impressed me so much about this work is the amazing amount of research involved in writing it. And because, I have a degree in, doctorate of divinity, I recognize the facts that you're bringing to the fore that are very little known and very carefully hidden. Where'd you do most of your research?
Well, where that's coming from is I got my master's in theology studying with Matthew Fox back in 1983. And then I wanted to get a PhD in early church history, patristics. But I had 4 children and a job in a publishing house, and I absolutely could not get a PhD. So what happened there was my character, Sarah Adamson, is actually me 30 years ago getting a PhD. And that was one of the fun things about writing fiction, was to have a character who fulfills a whole timeline, a whole living experience that I was never able to fulfill myself.
In other words, another dimension of who you are, Barbara.
Yeah, that's true. And because, see, what happened, Gwilda, is once I couldn't get a PhD, what do you think I did? I got one anyway.
That would be your style,
so
yes.
I spent 30 years.
I feel compelled to warn our listeners that some of the sexual scenes in this book are very graphic and intense. From what I've observed of you over the years reading your books, you rarely do anything without a reason. Why do you explore sexuality so deeply?
Because I think sexuality has such a formative influence on us. And once these characters appeared in my room and then I started working with them, of course, they all have sex lives. And everybody has a sex life. And I think the exploration of what goes on in people's sexuality is just fascinating and very revealing of character.
Yes, it is. And also, if we're going back, we look at sexuality and the sexual abuse of children as an access point for power.
Yeah. And then the characters are discovering, as you know, you see it in the first book and it's going on, they're gradually remembering things that have happened to them. So I'm dealing with that whole issue of the wounding, because there's no reason to abuse sexuality. And okay, what's the rule? The rule is you never do anything to anyone that they don't want, and it's just as simple as that. And so once that line is stepped over, then people go into crisis and need a great deal of healing. And of course, that's what I'm exploring with my characters.
Wow. I hate to bring us to a close. This has just been absolutely so riveting. Thank you so much for your contribution for the world, Barbara, and I hope we can play again soon. This has been The Science of Magic. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. Remember, you can always listen to this and other provoking episodes on our website, www.thescienceofmagic.net. Until next time, dear ones, may you be blessed with knowledge and comforted with love.
Searching through the night, one people, one nation.